If you've ever sacrificed everything for someone's dream only to discover you were never part of their vision for success, hit that like button. Subscribe if you believe that the people who use your love as currency eventually learn that some things can't be purchased at any price, because what I'm about to tell you proves that sometimes the person who takes everything ends up with nothing that matters. My name is Wren. I'm 35 years old. And the day my ex-fiancé stood outside my office begging me to forgive him so he could finally move forward with his life was the day I understood that withholding forgiveness isn't cruelty. It's a consequence. But before I tell you about that rainy afternoon when he finally understood what he'd lost, let me take you back to where love became transaction and trust became leverage, because every story of reckoning starts with someone believing devotion means you're willing to disappear. I met Caspian when I was 26 years old at an art gallery opening in Portland. I was working as a graphic designer at a small branding agency, making decent money and building a portfolio I was proud of. Caspian was 28, a photographer with raw talent and big dreams but very little commercial success. He approached me near a series of landscape photographs, asking what I thought of the composition. We talked for 2 hours about art, creativity, and the struggle to balance artistic integrity with financial necessity. He was passionate about photography in a way that was magnetic. He talked about light and shadow like they were living things, about capturing moments that revealed truth beyond what eyes could see. His intensity was intoxicating, and by the end of that night I was completely captivated. We started dating immediately. Caspian was unlike anyone I'd been with before. He was creative, spontaneous, deeply passionate about his work. He'd wake up at dawn to catch perfect lighting, would spend hours editing a single image until it was exactly right. But passion doesn't pay rent. Caspian was barely scraping by doing occasional wedding photography and event shoots, work he considered beneath his artistic abilities. He lived in a tiny studio apartment with equipment he'd bought on credit. He ate cheap food and wore the same 3 outfits constantly. 6 months into our relationship, I suggested he move in with me. I had a 2-bedroom apartment with space for a home studio. The rent wouldn't increase, and he could save money while focusing on building his photography business. He agreed, and within weeks, my spare bedroom was transformed into his workspace. Equipment covered every surface. His prints hung on my walls. His presence filled my home in ways that felt both exciting and overwhelming. For the first year, living together was mostly wonderful. I'd come home from my design job to find Caspian working on projects, and we'd cook dinner together while discussing our creative work. I loved supporting his dreams, loved watching him pursue something he was genuinely passionate about. Then Caspian started talking about opening his own photography studio. Not just a home workspace, but an actual commercial space where he could do high-end portrait sessions, offer photography workshops, and establish himself as a serious professional. The dream was ambitious and expensive. He'd need to lease space, build out a professional studio, purchase better equipment, and market himself to attract clients. The startup costs were estimated at around $80,000. Caspian had no savings and terrible credit. He couldn't get a business loan. His family didn't have money to invest, which left me. I'd been saving diligently since college, living below my means and investing conservatively. I had $95,000 in savings, money I'd planned to use as a down payment on a house someday. Caspian didn't ask directly at first. He'd mention the studio dream wistfully, talking about how close he was to making it happen if only he had capital. He'd show me business plans and financial projections, asking my opinion on the numbers. Finally, 3 months into the studio planning, he asked outright. "Wren," he said one evening after dinner, "I need to talk to you about something important." "I'm listening," I replied. "I've been thinking about the studio and about us," he continued. "I want to build this business not just for me but for our future. For the life we're going to build together." He pulled out a small box and opened it to reveal a ring. Not an expensive ring, just a simple silver band with a small stone, but the gesture was clear. "Marry me," he said. "Be my partner in life and in building this dream. Let's do this together." I said yes immediately, caught up in the romance and the vision of our shared future. We celebrated with cheap champagne and elaborate plans for our life together. The studio, the wedding, eventually kids and a house and everything we'd build as a team. Then came the real ask. 2 weeks after the engagement, Caspian brought up financing again. I've revised the business plan, he said, showing me updated projections. With $80,000 initial investment, the studio could be profitable within 18 months. After that, we'd have steady income from portrait sessions, workshops, and commercial work. This is our future, Wren. What we're building together. I looked at the man I'd agreed to marry, the man whose dreams had become intertwined with my own, and made the decision that would change everything. I invested $75,000 from my savings into Caspian's photography studio. We structured it as a loan rather than equity, which Caspian insisted was cleaner. He'd pay me back with interest once the business was profitable, and we'd eventually merge our finances completely after marriage. The paperwork was minimal, just a promissory note drafted by a lawyer friend of Caspian's. I signed it without having my own attorney review the terms. I trusted him completely. We were building our future together. Why would I need legal protection from my fiancé? The studio build-out took 4 months. I worked my design job during the day and helped Caspian evenings and weekends. I designed his logo, his website, his marketing materials, all for free because this was our shared project. I painted walls, assembled furniture, and used my professional network to get discounted rates on equipment and supplies. When Vale Photography Studio finally opened, it was beautiful. Exposed brick walls, professional lighting setups, a reception area I'd designed and decorated myself. Caspian's name was on everything. His vision realized through my money and labor. The opening reception was packed with local artists, potential clients, and press from Portland's creative community. Caspian gave a speech thanking everyone who'd supported his dream. He mentioned me briefly at the end, thanking his fiancée for her support. Not for financing the entire operation. Not for designing everything. Just for my support, like I'd been a cheerleader rather than the reason the studio existed. I pushed down my discomfort. He was overwhelmed and excited. Of course, he didn't detail every contribution in a public speech. That would come later, in private acknowledgement of everything I'd done. For the first 6 months after opening, Vale Photography Studio struggled. Clients were slow to come. Revenue barely covered operating expenses. Caspian was stressed constantly, snapping at me when I'd ask about finances or suggest marketing strategies from my design background. "You don't understand photography," he'd say dismissively. "Let me handle the business. I'm the one with skin in the game here." The phrase stung. I had $75,000 of skin in the game, my entire life savings. But I stayed quiet, supporting him through the difficult early phase every business faces. Then things started changing. Caspian's talent and my marketing design combined to attract attention. High-profile clients started booking sessions. His portrait work got featured in regional publications. Revenue climbed from barely covering costs to actually generating profit. By month 9, the studio was solidly profitable. Caspian was making more money than he ever had, and the business showed every sign of continued growth. I was thrilled for him, for us, for the validation that the risk had been worth it. But as success grew, Caspian changed. He started working longer hours, coming home after I was asleep. He'd schedule weekend workshops and networking events without checking if we had plans. When I'd complain about how little time we spent together, he'd accuse me of not supporting his success. "I sacrificed everything for this studio," he'd say. "Now that it's finally working, you want me to back off? That's not fair, Wren." Our engagement, which had been announced with such excitement, seemed forgotten. We never discussed wedding plans. The ring I wore felt less like a promise and more like a placeholder. 14 months after the studio opened, I finally asked about repayment of my $75,000 loan. The promissory note specified he'd start paying me back once the business was profitable, with full repayment within 5 years. "We're profitable now," I said carefully one evening. "I was thinking we should discuss the repayment schedule for my investment." Caspian looked annoyed. The business is profitable, but we need to reinvest capital for growth. I can't pull money out right now. The promissory note says repayment starts when you're profitable, I reminded him. We agreed to those terms. Caspian's expression hardened. Are you really going to hold me to legal documents, Wren? We're engaged. We're building a life together. That money is an investment in our future. Not a debt I owe you. But it is a debt, I said quietly. One you promised to repay. He stared at me like I'd said something offensive. You know what, fine. If you want to treat our relationship like a business transaction, I can do that too. Maybe we should rethink this whole engagement if you're going to be calculating about money. The threat was clear. If I pushed for repayment, our relationship was at risk. I backed down, terrified of losing him and everything we'd built together. I'm not trying to be calculating, I said. I just want us to honor our agreements. We will, he said dismissively. When the timing is right. Be patient. I was patient for another 6 months. During that time, Veil Photography Studio's success continued growing. Caspian hired 2 assistants. He upgraded equipment. He expanded into a second studio space. All of this growth was funded by revenue from the business I'd financed. Meanwhile, our relationship deteriorated. Caspian was distant, distracted, and increasingly dismissive of my contributions. When I'd mentioned that I'd designed his branding or that my investment had made the studio possible, he'd wave it off. You did some design work, he'd say. That's not the same as building a business. I'm the one who made this successful. 2 years after the studio opened, everything fell apart. I came home early from work one day to find Caspian packing his clothes. My heart stopped. What are you doing? I asked. I'm moving out, he said without looking at me. This isn't working anymore, Wren. We want different things. What different things? I demanded. I want a partner who celebrates my success instead of resenting it, he said. You've become so negative, so focused on money and repayment. That's not the kind of energy I need in my life right now. You owe me $75,000, I said, my voice shaking. You promised to pay me back. And I will, he said. Eventually. But I need space from this relationship. It's become toxic. He left that afternoon, moving his remaining possessions to an apartment near the studio. I sat in the home we'd shared, surrounded by the life I'd thought we were building together, and felt my entire world collapse. The man I'd loved, the man I'd financed and supported and sacrificed for, had used me to build his dream and then discarded me the moment he didn't need me anymore. I called a lawyer the next day. A different lawyer this time, one who worked for me rather than for Caspian. Her name was Octavia, and she was brutally honest after reviewing my promissory note. This is enforceable, she said. He legally owes you $75,000 plus the interest specified in the agreement. We can sue for repayment. How long will that take? I asked. 2 years minimum if he fights it, she replied. Maybe longer. Litigation is expensive and emotionally exhausting. And even if you win, collecting on a judgment can be difficult. What are my other options? I asked desperately. Negotiate a settlement, she suggested. Take less money in exchange for faster payment and avoiding court. I agreed to try negotiation first. Octavia sent a formal demand letter to Caspian requesting immediate repayment per the promissory note terms. His response came through his lawyer 2 weeks later. It was stunning in its audacity. Caspian claimed the $75,000 was a gift, not a loan. He argued that our engagement meant I'd given him the money to support our shared future, with no expectation of repayment. He pointed out that the promissory note lacked certain technical elements that would make it fully enforceable. His lawyer suggested that if I pursued litigation, Caspian would countersue for the value of rent and expenses I should have charged him while he lived with me. The betrayal was complete. He wasn't just refusing to pay me back. He was rewriting history, claiming my life savings had been a gift, threatening me if I fought for what I was owed. Octavia's assessment was grim. We can win this case, she said. But it'll cost you probably $30,000 in legal fees and 2 years of your life. Even after you win, Collecting might be impossible if he's hidden assets or structured his business to protect himself from creditors. I felt trapped. Fighting would cost money I no longer had and years of emotional energy. Not fighting meant accepting that I'd lost everything. I chose to fight anyway. Not because I thought I'd get my money back, but because I needed Caspian to face consequences for what he'd done. The lawsuit dragged exactly as Octavia had predicted. 2 years of depositions, document production, and court appearances. Caspian fought every step, claiming the money was a gift, that our engagement meant he owed me nothing, that I was a vindictive ex trying to destroy his success out of spite. Watching him lie under oath about our relationship and his promises was more painful than losing the money. Finally, after 2 years, a judge ruled in my favor. The promissory note was enforceable. Caspian owed me $75,000 plus interest and legal fees, totaling approximately $105,000. 1. Collecting was another matter entirely. Caspian claimed he didn't have liquid assets to pay the judgment. His lawyer presented financials showing all his money was tied up in the studio and its operations. Octavia could try to force a sale of business assets, but that process would take more time and money. Meanwhile, I'd spent $32,000 on legal fees and 2 years of my life fighting. I was exhausted, broke, and no closer to actually receiving payment. Then something unexpected happened. Veil Photography Studio's success attracted attention from a major photography company. They offered to acquire the business for $2.5 million. Caspian would finally be wealthy, selling a studio he'd built with my money and was refusing to pay me back. But the acquisition had a problem. The buyer's due diligence uncovered my outstanding judgment. They required the judgment to be satisfied before closing the purchase. Caspian needed to pay me to get his payday. His lawyer called Octavia with a settlement offer. Caspian would pay me $50,000 to release the judgment and allow the sale to proceed. It was less than half what he owed me. Your choice, Octavia said. Take $50,000 now and let him walk away with millions. Or hold out for full payment and maybe prevent the sale entirely. I thought about it for exactly 1 day before making my decision. I'm not releasing the judgment, I told Octavia. Not for $50,000. Not for the full amount. Not for anything. You'd rather get nothing than let him move forward, she asked, making sure I understood. I'd rather he stay trapped by what he owes me, I said. He used me to build his dream. Now his dream can't move forward without my permission. That's worth more than any dollar amount. Octavia was quiet for a moment. That's vindictive, she finally said. I know, I agreed. But it's also justice. Over the next 3 months, Caspian's lawyer made increasingly desperate offers. $60,000. $75,000. Full payment of $105,000 plus an additional $25,000 for my trouble. I rejected every offer. The acquisition deadline approached. The buyer was getting impatient. Caspian's dream sale, his big payday, was falling apart because I wouldn't release him from the debt he'd pretended didn't exist. Then Caspian did something I didn't expect. He showed up at my workplace. I was leaving my office building when I saw him standing by the entrance. He looked older, worn down by stress. Wren, he called out. Can we talk? Please. I stopped, surprised. We have nothing to discuss. Your lawyer can talk to my lawyer. I'm not here as a defendant, he said. I'm here as someone who wronged you and wants to make it right. A little late for that, I replied, turning to leave. He followed me. I know I was terrible to you, he said, his voice cracking. I know I used you, lied to you, tried to steal from you. I was selfish and cruel, and I destroyed the best thing in my life because I was too arrogant to see what I had. Kept walking. He kept following. I'll pay you everything, he said desperately. The full judgment plus whatever else you want. Just release the lien so I can complete this sale. Money isn't what I want anymore, I said, stopping to face him. Then what do you want, he asked. Forgiveness, I said simply. I want you to understand what you took from me that money can't replace. I gave you my savings, my time, my love, my trust. I designed your entire brand for free. I supported your dream while sacrificing my own. And you threw all of that away the moment you didn't need me anymore. Now you want me to forgive you so you can get rich off the business I financed. Why would I ever give you that?" Caspian's eyes filled with tears. "Because I'm begging you," he said. "'Cause I've learned my lesson. Because holding on to this anger is hurting you as much as it's hurting me." "You're wrong," I said quietly. "This anger is the only power I have left. You took everything else." Over the next 2 months, Caspian tried everything to get me to release the judgment. He sent flowers to my office. He wrote letters apologizing and explaining how he'd changed. He offered increasingly absurd amounts of money, eventually reaching $200,000 just to let him sell his business. I rejected everything. Not out of spite anymore, but out of a cold understanding that some debts can't be paid with money. He owed me something more valuable than any dollar amount. He owed me acknowledgement that what he'd done was unforgivable. The acquisition deadline passed. The buyer walked away, unwilling to wait longer for the judgment to be resolved. Vale Photography Studio stayed in Caspian's ownership, profitable but not liquid, valuable but not sold. He was trapped running a business that required his constant presence, unable to exit or move forward. 3 months after the failed sale, another buyer emerged. This one was willing to work around the judgment by structuring the deal differently. But they still required my cooperation to ensure the lien wouldn't block their ownership. Caspian's lawyer called with a new approach. "Miss Wren," he said formally, "my client is prepared to satisfy your judgment in full, pay your legal fees, and establish a foundation in your name with significant funding. He's trying to make amends." "I'm not interested in foundations," I said. "What is he willing to give me that actually matters?" There was a long pause. "What do you want?" the lawyer finally asked. "I want him to acknowledge publicly what he did," I said. "I want a written statement that gets published, not hidden, admitting he built his business with my financing, that he broke his promises to repay me, that he tried to claim my investment was a gift. I want everyone who thinks Caspian Vale is a self-made success story to know the truth about who actually made his success possible." The lawyer was quiet. "He'll never agree to that." "Then he'll never sell his business," I said. "And I'll spend the rest of my life making sure every potential buyer knows exactly why there's a judgment against him." 2 weeks later, Caspian published a post on his studio's website and personal social media. The post was titled "An Overdue Acknowledgement and Apology." In it he detailed everything. How I'd financed his studio with my life savings. How I'd designed his branding and marketing. How he'd promised to repay me and then tried to claim the money was a gift. How he'd ended our engagement when I asked for repayment. How he'd spent 2 years fighting a lawsuit he knew he'd lose rather than honor his promises. The post was honest, humiliating, and permanent. His reputation in Portland's photography community was immediately damaged. Comments flooded in from people expressing disgust at his behavior. Some clients canceled bookings. His carefully crafted image as a successful, ethical artist was destroyed by the truth about how he'd built that success. After he published the acknowledgement, Caspian called me directly. "I did what you ask," he said, his voice hollow. "I told the truth publicly. Everyone knows what I did now. Does that satisfy you?" "Almost," I said. "What else do you want?" he asked desperately. "I want you to understand that forgiveness isn't something you can demand or purchase," I replied. "You seem to think if you pay enough money or make the right public statement, I'll absolve you. But forgiveness doesn't work like that. Some things can't be fixed. Some betrayals are permanent. So you're never going to forgive me," he said. "I'm never going to make this right." I didn't say that, I corrected it. I said you can't demand or purchase forgiveness. Maybe someday I'll forgive you because I want to let go of this anger. But that'll be my choice, my timeline, my decision. Not something you can force by meeting my demands. Caspian was silent for a long moment. "The sale is dead," he finally said. "The buyer saw the post and pulled out entirely. They don't want the controversy. Everything I built is tainted now." "Good," I said coldly. "Now you understand what it feels like to have something taken from you that you can't get back." I hung up feeling hollow rather than triumphant. I'd gotten everything I'd demanded. Public acknowledgement. Consequences for his behavior. The satisfaction of watching his perfect image shatter. But none of it brought back my savings or the years I'd lost or the trust that had been broken. Over the next year, I slowly rebuilt my own life. I took a better-paying design job at a larger agency. I started saving again, though it would take years to recover what I'd lost. I went to therapy to process the betrayal and my own choices that had enabled it. And I thought a lot about forgiveness. Not whether Caspian deserved it, but whether I deserved to be free of the anger that was consuming me. 18 months after Caspian's public acknowledgement, I received a check in the mail. $105,000, the full judgment amount including interest and legal fees. The note attached was simple. This doesn't fix what I broke, but it pays what I owe. Sorry, Wren. For everything. I deposited the check and sat with complicated feelings. The money helped. It restored part of what I'd lost financially. But it didn't heal the deeper wound. 3 months after receiving payment, I wrote Caspian a letter. Not because he'd asked for one or because I owed him anything, but because I needed to articulate what I'd learned from this entire experience. Caspian, I wrote, I'm writing this letter not for you but for myself. I need to put into words what the past 4 years have taught me about trust, betrayal, and the complicated nature of forgiveness. You used me. That's the simple truth. You used my money, my labor, my love, and my trust to build something for yourself. When I asked for what I was owed, you tried to rewrite history and claim I'd given those things freely with no expectation of return. That betrayal was worse than the initial taking because it meant you saw me as someone whose contributions didn't matter, whose memory could be manipulated, whose claims could be dismissed. I spent 2 years angry, another year vindictive, and several months now trying to understand what I actually want from this situation. What I've realized is that what I wanted most wasn't money or public acknowledgement. It was for you to understand the cost of what you took. Not the financial cost but the emotional one. The years I spent doubting myself, wondering if I'd been unreasonable to expect repayment, questioning whether I'd misunderstood our relationship. You made me feel crazy for remembering promises you'd actually made. That gaslighting was perhaps the cruelest part. I accept your repayment. I acknowledge your public apology. But I want you to know that forgiveness, real forgiveness, isn't something I can give you right now. Maybe I never will. That's not cruelty. It's honesty. Some betrayals are so fundamental that they permanently alter relationships. What you did to me changed how I see people, how I trust, how I love. I'm working through that with therapy and time, but those changes are lasting. If you're looking for absolution so you can move forward without guilt, I can't provide that. Your guilt is your consequence to carry. What I can say is this. I hope you've learned that using people has costs that outlast any business success. I hope you've internalized that your talent doesn't excuse your betrayal. I hope your next relationship is built on genuine partnership rather than extraction. I'm moving forward with my life. You should move forward with yours. But we're moving forward separately. And that separation is permanent. I mailed the letter and felt something release inside me. Not forgiveness exactly, but acceptance that this chapter was closed. 2 years after sending that letter, I heard through mutual acquaintances that Caspian had finally sold his studio. Not for the original $2.5 million, but for $800,000. His reputation never fully recovered from the public acknowledgement, and buyers were wary of the controversy. He'd lost millions because of how he'd treated me. I felt nothing when hearing this news. Not satisfied. Not vindication. Just distant acknowledgement that consequences had played out as they should. I'd rebuilt my savings to over $60,000. I'd been promoted to creative director at my agency. I'd started dating again, carefully and with better boundaries. I'd built a life that didn't include space for Caspian or anger about what he'd done. Then, 4 years after our engagement ended, I received an invitation in the mail. Caspian was getting married. The invitation included a handwritten note. Wren, I know this might be strange to receive, but I wanted you to know that I'm marrying someone who's taught me what real partnership looks like. Someone I treat with the respect and honesty I should have shown you. I'm not asking you to attend. I'm just acknowledging that you were right about everything, and I'm trying to be better. Hope you're well. I threw the invitation away without responding. Some people deserve to know they're forgiven. Some people need to live with uncertainty about whether their amends were accepted. Caspian would spend the rest of his life wondering if I ever truly forgave him. That wondering was my final gift to him, a reminder that some things can't be bought, demanded, or resolved on his timeline. Today, I'm 35 years old with a successful career, healthy savings, and a relationship built on actual partnership rather than extraction. I learned expensive lessons about protecting myself, about the difference between supporting someone and being used by them, about the fact that love shouldn't require you to disappear so someone else can shine. What Caspian took from me financially was significant. What he taught me about self-protection was invaluable. I wouldn't wish the experience on anyone, but I also wouldn't trade what I learned from it. If this story showed you that some debts can never truly be repaid because they involve things money can't buy, hit that like button. Subscribe for more stories about betrayal, consequence, and the complicated nature of forgiveness. Drop a comment about a time someone wanted your forgiveness and whether you gave it. Because sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is withhold absolution from people who hurt you, letting them carry their guilt as the natural consequence of their choices. Not all stories end with reconciliation. Some end with you walking away from people who showed you exactly who they are, believing them and building something better without them. Subscribe to the channel and see you in the next one.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoy watching Karma, Payback, come full circle every week, we dive into tales of betrayal and poetic justice. Don't miss the next one. Tap the subscribe button and join the Revenge Squad.